studio here in Flint, Genesee County, and we are, of course, stationed in. Let's see, we're in. We have to always have a different way of presenting the program. We are the program that governs the hour from 2 o'clock to 3. We'll put it that way for today. We have to think of some new titles. We'd be very creative around here. We're not there yet at the level of these uh, networks like well maybe some of them not maybe on the level we are. They're certainly not on the information level that we are, but in terms of how they present themselves, I think that Fox was used to be used to talk about the number one. Everybody talk about the number one studio, and they're doing this, and they're broadcasting and presenting these kinds of things and have this many viewers. Well, maybe some of that is a hyperbole right now because people are now looking at these social media networks, and a lot of them. I'm talking about Joe Rogan's program. Joe Rogan pulls in an average of 20 million viewers. I don't think any of the networks can claim they have that many viewers. And then Tucker Carlson, I think Carson's number two, right below that. And some they seem like they fluctuate back and forth, but people are turning away from these networks. They understand the commercialization of those stations and the controls in back of it because of the FCC requirements for their license, and they have to be governed by the bottom line. The bottom line is that they have to make a profit, and these studios is quiet, but they're towing the line by even I can see it even in the guests that they invite on their program, and this these people that are thinking outside the box, and they're not a whole lot of them there, but there are some, and you just wait for them to be on national these national stations. You never see them on there. I don't think you'll ever see the persons that really understand the Constitution of the United States on there because the one they put on there don't understand it. And I'm qualified to challenge them on what they're saying because what they're saying it's not going to work. I don't know where they learn this stuff from. I'm getting to wonder about these degrees they're handing out now. When they handed out, I did my grad work. I got my master's in I think '87. Was it '87? Yeah, '87. I think it was '87. Then '90 for my PhD. I tell you something. I don't think. I really don't think that. I don't know. I'm not going to downgrade anybody's degree. Everybody, you go through a rigorous. There's some training involved in it. It's higher than the training you got at the last level. But I'm beginning to wonder. They just pass this paper out now because you pay the money, you stay a long enough time, and you put in the hours. You sit in the classroom, and they hand you this paper. But what's the extent of the expertise behind it? And I'm beginning to raise that question now because I'm listening to all these scholars. Some of them are old school scholars. They didn't just come out of grad school recently. Some the ones that did, there's really a question about them. But some of the ones that came out a long time ago, in the same time period, I'm getting to question some of what is that training about? Because you can't say some of the things I hear them saying on national television. It makes me wonder about who are they bringing on the network, and why these folks, and then to exclusion of some other people, who if these are the best that they have out there, then that can't. I refuse to accept that because well, I'm not going to brag about it, but they don't. There's people out here that can that are much more grounded than the people they have on those networks. I know that because I'm trained in this area, and I will tell you that I don't know where this training is coming from. I used to think it was maybe the new school, but now I'm getting to see some of these old heads out here talking nonsense, and the things they're saying cannot be sustained. But if anyway, making a long story short, don't well that old adage about don't believe only half of what you don't hear, don't believe anything that you hear, and only half what you see. That has a lot of credence to it because even your own lying eyes can deceive you, but certainly what you're hearing can be deceptive. But if you're in this area, you can probably catch most of it because I'll tell you something. These persons are not trained in this area. I can just tell you that they're not trained in this area, or if they are, they weren't listening because I don't think instructors can teach what I'm hearing them say, and I don't think I didn't have an instructor saying it. I didn't hear anybody talking about uh, you could have a lower court. This is what they're going with. They're not complaining about it. That you can have a lower court arresting the voice of the president of the United States. I'm going to tell you something. I don't think you can be more horrified over that analysis of our Constitution of the United States because that abrogates the whole document to say that. The whole document is being abrogated by going with the idea that you can, in fact, have a lower court tell a president of the United States, don't forget he's a president, he's the only elected officer by the whole people, the whole electorate, vote for the president of the United States. They're saying that an appointed office holder, a judge in a district court, can tell a president of the United States where to get off and what he can and cannot do. And that is not a constitution that I've read.
I actually saw somebody in front of these house, I think it was, and it was a woman. And from her dress and her appearance, she didn't seem to be a conservative woman, but she was bringing that point up. She goes, he is the president of the United States, and about the administrative branch and all that, and the powers that they had. And she said, this is unprecedented, of having lower court judges trying to stop what he wants to do. I mean, I'm just dismayed. I've never seen this done ever before. I mean,
never. No, they've never done this before, and they're only doing it now because the person is occupying that office, and they look at him as an occupier, not a legitimate person that won the position because he did something very different out of the mix of all the other presidents that stood in that office, either have been president through the death of their predecessor, or they have been elected based upon either the experience in the military or the experience in the political arena. And here comes a man that is that breaks the mold, and then who he broke it against in 2016 broke the mold against one of their heavyweights. She was going to be the first female president of the United States. It's going to show how far we've come. You come a long way, baby. You can smoke cigarettes. You can smoke cigarettes now, and you come a long way. And they thought this was a given, and they let their hair down, and they didn't take this man seriously because I can understand. I wasn't laughing. I saw the sincerity of the campaign. I saw the numbers going into those arenas he was speaking in, and I could see this was a problem. And on the November the 8th, 2016, it culminated in what I thought I was looking at with my lying eyes. I thought I was looking at an upset, and my lying eyes were not lying after all. They were lying. They were saying that the guy had no chance, and because they were wrong, and because they had mud in their face, they find that election was unforgiven. It's unforgivable what happened in that election, and they've not gotten over it yet, and they're not going to get over it. They are not until they get Trump out of office. Are they going to quiet this nerve that's been hit by this man being elected in a way in which nobody ever done this before? Nobody ever done this before what Donald Trump accomplished, but there's been no president like Donald Trump. And I'm going to say this very, very carefully, having thought about it for a while. His presidency, if he continues the way he's going right now, and doesn't get tripped up by some of the inane kind of things that go on, the nonsense that goes on when you have power, and you're wielding it. Sometimes you can do it without thinking about all of the hazards of that wielding of that power. But if he continues down the road he's going down, then his presidency will go down as Mount Rushmore like in many respects. But he has to be, but he cannot get tripped up, as I think Pam Bondi has gotten tripped up, and that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what is happening in the position she's in as the Attorney General of the United States. And that position, really President of the United States, behind the President of the United States, is the second most powerful position in this country.
Probably more powerful than the vice presidency.
The vice presidency is neutered. You know, I mean, that's what it is like. You know, if you want to get rid of somebody, what you do is you want to get rid of their mouth. You put them in the vice presidential chair, where they number one, you put them inside the tent, where because they're inside the tent, they can do no, they cannot, do their business in the tent. They have to do their business outside the tent. You know what I'm talking about. And so, is that Johnson idea, right? You want the person to be in the tent rather than doing their business from in the tent and business going out of the tent.
Incidentally, who do you think was the worst vice president, Johnson or Pence? I think Johnson still holds the lead because I think he had something to do with executing the assassination of JFK.
Yeah, he did, and his presidency was not except Vietnam. His presidency cannot be called a failed presidency because of the fact he came. It wasn't so much him as it was that he came after John F. Kennedy, and the country was in for some comeuppance about the fact we had a president assassinated, and there were certain legislative things that were to be carried out in his name. Now the man was dead, and so in honor of the deceased president we had, number 35, there was this idea that something has to be done in restitution for allowing this to happen, because the president cannot be assassinated if the guardians, not the guardian angels, but the guardians of the president, their job is to keep the president alive. You talking about the presidency of one man, you got a team around him, and so yeah, you give me a break. You can't look. I'm still studying the Kennedy murder, and I can tell you right now, I can tell you sight unseen. I can tell you based on 40 years of looking at this, and I'm still looking at it and find out new things as I continue to look. It's impossible to kill John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, under those circumstances, unless the guardians of this president were not doing their job. It could not have happened. And they were not only not doing their job, they were involved in the sabotaging of this president. And I will state that on my mom's grave and a stack of Bibles. That's what the evidence is. I know the evidence very well, and I'm still learning and studying it almost on a constant basis. At least I'm looking at everything at least 1 or 2 times a week. I'm still looking at the case. Anything that comes out, I'm still handling it. You cannot do that. But Donald Trump came in here. Everybody was. Here's Obama saying, "I just don't believe that Mr. Trump will ever be president." He said it so authoritatively, and everybody was laughing. Out there, you could almost hear the laughter out there in the yard, because nobody gave this man a shot. This man was talking about running for president. You never held an elective office before, and that mold has not been carved out, not even by George Washington, because George Washington was the commander in chief. He didn't have any political office he had held before that, not even a city council position. But the man was the founding father of the country, and he was also the commander in chief of the military that went up against the British Empire and stood it down by simply not running into the eye of the hurricane, but to avoid, to use judo and sidestep some of it and know when to hit and when, what's that song? Know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And he knew George Washington was a genius in terms of the strategy. The strategy is not to run into the strength of the opponent, but to use his strength, to use the opponent's strength against himself. The distance from England to where those troops were, many of them Hessian troops, foreign troops, mercenaries, and what was their stake in it other than just a paycheck? And so you take advantage of that. They were less vested than some of the other soldiers were. And on the 26th of December of 1776, that's who George Washington attacked when he crossed the Delaware River. That's who he attacked those Hessian soldiers because they were not British, and their interest in it was the extent of that check that came. Well, you say check that, but they're being paid, but they had no patriotic interest in the outcome. And George Washington hit them that night while they celebrating and drinking and having spirits and things like that, and they are going into all the spirits and having a celebratory moment and all that. George Washington is plotting against the the odds, trying to make the odds more even by doing that which was unexpected. And he did that on the 26th of December, when that morning, after everybody was still not all the way back, they had not sobered up, many of them, and that's when George Washington struck. Yeah, they made him president of the United States. Everybody knew he was going to make him president of the United States. You can see that in the writings at the convention. But nobody ever done what Trump did. They were surprised. They were shocked. I stayed up all that night. I wanted to see their faces because I knew after watching that campaign, and from one place to another, it wasn't just one place that he was actually energizing the voters. Everywhere the man went, there was these persons that you had to have a larger arena to hold these people. I never seen anything like it before in the campaign. No president. You saw presidents going on a caboose of a train and coming out on the back of it, and that's people standing around the railroad tracks, and you speaking to them, and the train pulls off, you go to the next place. This band is going into a city, and there's nobody singing, and no guitars being played. And after the national anthem, somebody's speaking, and you're gonna sit there for an hour and a half. First of all, an hour, you're waiting on the person to arrive, and then he arrives, you're still there, and there's no anybody offering entertainment. He's the entertainment. And I kept watching that way and went. I said, this thing is not. I'm watching CNN. We're not CNN too. I was watching it, but not as much as I was watching the stations I had more confidence at that time. One that was Fox. Don't have much confidence in them now as I did then. But I was watching Fox. I was watching Newsmax. Newsmax is my favorite station now. I watched that. I was just watching what everybody was saying here. They didn't give them a lot of. Everybody was just wondering how early will the election be announced, the outcome be announced on November the 8th, 2016. They were just not going to. This is not going to be a contest. Nobody was giving this man a chance. The polls were being skewed to fit the narrative. And that day, I had said in a post here, I think I did a post on that day, that morning. And I said in that post that morning, this country's getting ready to be shocked. I wrote that on the morning of the 8th of November, the election day that year, 2016. And I said that the nation is in for a shock. Because my eyes couldn't have been lying in every place he spoke in. And there was some place he spoke in where he wasn't supposed to be that popular. The numbers he was still drawing numbers. Nobody else was drawing. And I looked over across the political fence to see the campaign of Hillary Clinton, who should have been killing it by what they were saying. And there was nobody showing up. I mean, a lot of cars would be parked there. Maybe one person's car, one person that car, making like a whole lot of person there, and you honk the horn to make some noise. But when it came to cameras actually honing in on the crowd, they were very clear about that couldn't happen because then it would reveal that the numbers were not there. I mean, nobody told me about her, the way she looked, the way. Yeah, nobody told me about her. So nobody told me the real story about her. That nobody was showing up in her rallies. You could put the people showing up in the rallies in a phone booth, and that in 2024, that this woman running for the Democratic nomination 24 was running the Hillary Clinton campaign all over again, and was getting the same result Hillary Clinton was getting. Nobody was showing up. You brought Bonzi in there, and they came to hear her singing. When she didn't sing, they walked away. I saw that. And I predicted this is going to be another landslide, and it was another landslide. But there were 3 landslide elections that this man was elected to, and they gave him credit for 2. They couldn't get rid of him, and they could not cheat him out of the 3rd one because everybody was watching the theft. I said also the second time they ran in 2020, Donald Trump did not lose that election, but they didn't have the same letdown in their presentation of the election that they had in 2016. They were prepared for it. They saw the handwriting on the wall this time. They saw that he's running still a very popular campaign. He was running a better campaign in 2020 than did in 2016. Got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. Try that on for candidates, where you get 12 million more votes as an incumbent when you've had a record to run on. Anybody knows what you did or didn't do, and they're holding you accountable for what you didn't do. Because you're not going to do all the things that you promised. Because under promise, you're going to get defeated. And if you over promise and get elected, it's too late for them to defeat you after the election's over. So it's better it's better to over promise than under promise. And he had promised. I don't think they necessarily over promised, but he promised to do some things in his campaign. And when he did it in 2016, people rewarded him for it and gave more votes in 2020. Donald Trump did not lose the election in 2020. I'm telling you what happened. They didn't. I studied this carefully. I went back and studied it. That did not happen. Donald Trump did not lose in 2020. They took it. They took the election from him and gave it to this 5th year of swamp rat in Washington. And they stole the elections. They've done some other elections we've had. And one day I'm going to list the elections that were stolen in this country prior to that, long time before that, starting with the election of John Adams in John Adams in 1790 and 1790. Don't get me started. John Adams was elected in 1796, but in 1800 that election John Adams loss was taken from him through some shenanigans that occurred in the House of Representatives, and there's a very good book about that election, the tumultuous election of 1800 between Jefferson and John Adams. It needs to be read. That is a very good book by one of the definitive writers of that time period. I think I've read 3 books about things he wrote about during that time period. One of them on the great George Washington, the greatest president we've had. But you don't expect a person to come up from nowhere. You might come from nowhere. Has this happened? How many times has this happened? You come up from nowhere and you run for governor, and you win the highest office in the state. I don't know if I can recall any time. Let's see, have a governor come out of nowhere with no prior experience in the political arena, not necessarily the military arena, but political arena, and become governor. I can't think of anybody on the spot that has done that. And I know that it's hard to do, and it's almost impossible to do as a president. It takes an unusual person to accomplish it, and that is what we have in Donald Trump. But I have to tell you this: I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool supporter of any person in power. I have a jaundiced eye when it comes to all of them. I think they all need to be watched because I know that the human makeup is flawed. And until it's perfected, and I don't know how you do that, we're not going to put any robots in there. Well, we're not going to put any um, non-human robots in there. We've had some we've had some robots in there. Joe Biden was one. But I don't think that you can have. I just don't think you had. And I'm just going through my memory. People going. I know you're gonna say we're learning Wallace. Yeah, but she was riding on the coattails of her husband, George Wallace. Wallace couldn't, limit you to how many terms you can run in succession for governor. And George Wallace had served that, and what he did, he and Lurleen Wallace didn't get along that well, but what he did was decide that he can't run, but he could still be the governor through her, and so she ran. But they already knew that George Wallace was in back of the governorship. You can do it that way. You can finesse it. There are ways to get around everything, but the rule of thumb is that you got to have some kind of political experience. Let's put it that way. You can't just walk into these high offices and just come off the street and run. I have a friend think he can run right now and become governor of Michigan. Why? Because he saw the bad job that Whitmer has done and is doing, and he thinks he can just walk off the street and do that, and he wants to run for governor now. And he's talented, but it takes a special talent to do that, and he is talented, but he's not special talent. Donald Trump is more than talented. He's this man especially talented. He actually did something beyond what they normally do, even in the political arena, and that is Donald Trump was a master builder, and you almost have to have the skills that nobody on the earth has, even in making a pencil. Martin Freeman said that nobody is smart enough in the world that knows how to make a pencil. And he was right. It takes a person that's in multiple areas to be able to make a pencil. Somebody got to they know how to do the graphite, got to do it. Somebody got to know how to do the wood. There's a piece of tin at the end of the pencil, and there's a piece of rubber inside it to erase your mistakes and things like that. No one person knows how to do it. It takes a special talent to do some things. It may look easy to the outsider, but those who are involved in the makeup of it know that that's a special talent you're looking at. And I say that Trump has a special talent. You can tell that by the fact that no one out of, and was the 45th president, not the 47th, out of 45 presidents that 44 we'd had prior to him, 43 different ones, the 44 presidents before him, counting Cleveland, counting Grover Cleveland, Cleveland in 1884 and 1896. I'm sorry, 1884 and 1892, because Benjamin Harrison was in between. So Grover Cleveland was 22 and 24 with the same person. So I still count them. I count them differently because they served different. They didn't serve consecutive terms, so I count them differently, 22 and 24. But it takes a special person to do that because people look at you. They do look at your credentials in the sense that you have to have some experience. You cannot just go in there and say, "I'm running for president of the United States, ladies and gentlemen, and vote for me." There's some that tried it, parole, and some of those persons tried that, and they were turned down at the gate for whatever reason. And the Stetson, who ran how many times did Stetson run for president and got turned down? And Joe Biden ran 3 times for president and turned him down, even though he was more experienced. But what experience did Stetson have? Eric Stetson, that they ran 4 or 5 times for president and got turned away each time. Yeah, you got talent, but it takes a special talent to overcome the burden of that. That's a burden. No experience in the political arena, and then no military experience, that give people some confidence that you're stable enough and you have enough background to handle this major responsibility you have, because you become the head. This is their notion about it, and I kind of agree with it a little bit, of the most powerful office holder in the world. And you have to have some confidence that that person can do that job. That's a very difficult job to do, because the whole world is raining down on you. Anyone don't think, if you don't think it's a hard job to do, take these jobs on a lower level. For example, a principalship, which I held for 3 years, where everything rains down in your office. You're not even responsible for 90% of it, but it ends up on your desk. It's your problem to solve it. Also, although it's outside your domain, because there's some skills you got to have in those that are out there that have created the problem, and that's got to be, you got to manage it through their skill level. But your desk is where it ends up, and it takes a special person to handle all that. And Donald Trump has been able to do it. People are marveling over the fact that this man doesn't seem like he needs a whole lot of shut eye. You can't have a lot. You don't have any shut eye. You know, I never had a lunch hour. You don't have time for any lunch. Everything is because all the pieces are moving all the time, and they're all moving in a different way toward that door that you are in, and where your desk is in that room. And I'll tell you, I know what kind of person we have there, because I have been in a lesser position where you have immense responsibilities, and I know how that works, and how it weighs down in the space that you're sitting in. And for him to be able to do the things I see him doing, I marvel at it, because I know that that takes a special person to do it. He's able to handle it. And if things go the way they're going right now, it doesn't get mixed up like Pam, if it doesn't get tripped up like Pam Bondi has done, he could be a Mount Rushmore character. I'm not saying gonna put him up there on a wall anywhere. They're not gonna do that again. We got Mount Rushmore. They got 4 presidents up there. That's where there's gonna be none gonna go up there. No additional ones coming down. No one up there coming down to make room for anyone going up there. And no additional ones going up there if they all stay. If they are taking, they're not putting anybody else on Mount Rushmore. You can forget that. It's not going to happen. they had a problem finding 3 others to be up there with George Washington, and and none of them belong up there. not with George Washington. I'm just sorry yeah, I know that's just it. I know nobody agrees with me on that. Scholars don't agree with me on that. But you're not telling me about Theodore Roosevelt up there on Mount Rushmore. You're not going to be telling me about uh, 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 look. You can't even tell me about Thomas Jefferson up there. Now, as president, I give him credit for what he did in terms of writing the Declaration, but he didn't belong up there because of his presidency. And he's not up there as in the top 10 of the presidents either. He's not up there in the top 10. But you give him credit for what he did. He's up there. If they are he's a ceremonial Mount Rushmore candidate, ceremonial. Because how do you leave off the man who started it all? Didn't start it all, but who concretized what had been started? Because the revolution didn't start in '76. The revolution started different dates. I don't give you the date, March 5th, 1770, like a lot of them do. They want to talk about Christmas addicts. There's not the date. The date is when this person said, "Give me liberty or give me death." or when Thomas Paine was writing his work and igniting the people for the possibility that they didn't have to take this anymore. And then Jefferson comes along behind that, and he concretizes the sentiment. And he talks about a long train of abuses and so on and so forth. People get tired and not gonna. And what they're doing is that guy hollering out that window. We're not gonna. We're mad as it's the devil, and we're not gonna take it anymore. That's when the Shan hits the fan. And Jefferson's up there on Mount Rushmore as the person who concretized that energy in what he wrote, because he was able to put it in writing. But the sentiment was not Jefferson. The writing, the words was Thomas Jefferson. The sentiment had been born before Jefferson stood up. I was speaking in one place. I remember I was speaking one day at a certain place, and I was talking about the Haitian Revolution. And I asked the people who was the formative leader of the Haitian the Haitian revolt. And you test them, and they throw out these names. What are they going to say? Toussaint Louverture. I knew they were going to say Toussaint Louverture. But Toussaint Louverture, that's not how you look at. You don't look at the persons who stood up after the energy had been actually produced and is standing in the shadow, in the limelight of the shadow being the shadow figures were those before that person was standing in the limelight, but the limelight did not start with that person. And so they all would get it wrong. And I would always then want to come behind and say, well, what about the ones that actually were there before Toussaint Louverture? Because Toussaint Louverture was watching the action, and then later on, 13 years in the aftermath of the American Revolution, they were taking the energy from George Washington and others, and they were not going to take it anymore this time from the French. You can go read. There's a good book you can read about that. Book came out in 1939. The Black Jacobins by the Trinidadian writer. Very great book.
You know, I'm kind of confused about the that term Jacobins, because it's used in other things in historical periods and for political science. I don't know if it's the same type of people. Usually, it's associated more currently towards the left. But I never, maybe would that be something to touch on? I try to search it down, and I know the Jacobins, there's like something going on. The Jacobite rebellion went on there in Scotland and Ireland, Scotland and England.
But the Jacobins would be the ones that we're talking about the birthright here. You have it in your children's nursery rhyme. Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. That's expression of the same thing. It's the Jacob and Esau story.
That's where it comes from, because I was always curious to see that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that some people think Jacob and James are like that's always something I heard association that was like interchangeable, and I didn't.
Yeah, well, Jack is really you have to pronounce each part of the syllable. You make it into one syllable, Jack, but it's really Jacob, Jack. Look at CK and get that part. Jack, that's Jacob. So the story is you put it into nursery rhymes, the children will learn it. But the story is about birthright, the right to the ancestral wherewithal, the goods and the power and so on and so forth. It's a birthright kind of issue. And what Jacob did was steal the birthright that belonged to Esau. And that was the idea of the Jacobins having taken the birthright.
I get it. Now I get it. Yeah,
from the owners. You see, the owners, the owners were not those black Jacobins or the Jacobins in France. They were not the ones that were actually ruling it. They had to cut off some heads in order to get to that place. And so Marie Antoinette and Louis the 16th, their heads rolled, and so now the Jacobins are getting that they're not the ones that were to be in that power center. So they call them Jacobites. They were Jacobites in Haiti the same way. They were the ones that stood up, but they're not. But it's not it's not Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture was Johnny Come Lately. The ones that were there were people like uh, uh, John Francois, Biosal, Dessalines, and Christophe. And they had been, by the way, that some of the person in that delegation were the ones who were fighting on the side of the United States because they were fighting with the French. That's not been talked about. There were Haitians that were fighting in the American Revolution because they were fighting with France, because Haiti was one of the chief colonies of France at that time. And so you can go and look at some of the photographs and see the French influence, but also the Black Jacobites. They're not standing up in Haiti at this point, but they will later on. But they have some experience back here on American soil, and there's a connection between the two. The French Revolution, American Revolution, have a lot of seams that they can that have been sewn together, now split apart as if they're not coming out of the same energy, but the same energy is where it produced them. But I'm just saying, my point I'm trying to make here is that it takes unusual people to move the needle, and Donald Trump did something that you just it's not going. I don't think it'll ever happen again. I don't think there's a person in America today. There's only one Donald Trump in America today. Those politicians in Washington, Donald Trump is just actually working circles around them. They're all against him. But I tell you this, they dare not come out, except the ones that's way over there on the left. They dare not come out. And if you're not Adam Schiff and this guy, Jamie, what's his rat's name? I don't have no respect for this guy. He was on that January 6th committee. What's that guy's name? These people are not on Trump's level. Adam Schiff's not on Trump's level, and these are his lessons. If they had the smarts and given the numbers of that out there against the man would have been gone by now. They impeached him twice and put him on trial twice in the Senate. They just impeached him and put him on trial in the Senate. One time after he left office, they put him on trial. He had left the office by then, but they wanted to nail that. They want to make sure he didn't get back inside that door, because they knew the potential that they were looking at. This man had tremendous talent. They were recognizing that. They wanted to nail that door shut once they got him out of there, and they got him out of there in 2020. And they want to nail that door shut, even though he had lost the. They said they lost the presidency in 2020. They want to nail that door shut so he couldn't come back, but they failed to get a conviction. And you see what happened as a result of that. But they're trying to get a conviction, because to get a conviction, they can then come behind it based on Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. And they could have come behind it and then passing a resolution or an addendum to the action that had brought about his removal from office, add an addendum to it. You have the conviction first, we add an addendum to it. And the addendum would say that because he's been convicted, he is not deserving of ever holding a federal office again, and then bar him from actually doing that. But without a conviction, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 doesn't work. Isn't that right, you scholars? Yes or no? And that was the intent. This man is unusual. I'm just telling you, you can't do stuff like that. When you find something that happened unusual, it takes an unusual person to have done it. And really, when person do unusual things, the person that come behind them do something different. I see that. I look at let's see, everything like in my household. I look at my household. I see nobody's gonna be making uh, another some of these gadgets in your house. They're not gonna be making those things like in my kitchen. I got a juicer in there and got a toaster in there. Got some other George Foreman grill in there and things like that. A toaster, yeah, they got that, and they're not going to be going out there trying to invent a toaster. They already got a toaster. Now, if you can find something that do multiple things, that'll be something different. But in terms of making another toaster, you may make it where it hold more than 2 slices of bread. But look, somebody in some genius already has done that, been there and done that. They're not going and doing that again. They're not going to try to find a way to make a toaster that can toast at the bottom and toast at the top. They might expand the number of areas to drop the bread down into. But people move on to some other things. You can't be duplicated. You're not a genius because you can imitate and copy and you do that which is already been done. You get something different. So I don't see anybody coming behind. I just don't see them come behind Donald Trump. I just don't see it. You come behind a man who did the impossible dream. The man had an impossible dream. I'm about to dream the impossible dream. This man had the impossible dream. Something that never been done before. A man coming out of real estate had done a very good job in that area, but never had done anything politically. And it seemed like he was in an avoidance mode in terms of the military. He wasn't doing anything illegally. He just didn't go in there and serve. So he didn't have any military background. And this man ran for president of the United States. And who had ever done that before? And who expects him to be able to do it? Nobody. Obama saying, I just don't think Mr. Trump will be president. He was talking very authoritatively until it happened. And that's when I saw how unusual this man is, because to dream the impossible dream is one thing, but to do the impossible dream, and this man did both. He had the impossible dream, and then he acted on it and accomplished it. And I don't think you'll ever see that again. I just don't see that happening again, because I don't see another Donald Trump on the scene anywhere in any part of this country right now. There's only one Donald Trump in the country. Only one person like him. And that's why it pains me to have written that article I wrote today. And I did write it on Facebook, and I put it out there for everybody to see. I called for Pam Bondi to step down. And I did it out of love for her zeal, for her past performance as the Attorney General of Florida. You know, she wasn't the first choice that Donald Trump had. Gates was from Florida, was his first choice, but then he now get the support of the French element in the Republican Party, not Mamie Clark. She's not going to vote for him, and certainly Lisa Murkowski is not going to vote for him, because that gives them some credit over there with the Democrats, because they're running in these strongholds where the Republican Party is not really as strong as the Democratic Party. Certainly not in Maine, and Murkowski has to run. You have to go instead of how she won her campaign, because there's a lot of finessing that she's done over in Alaska. But Maine is a Democratic stronghold, and for Mamie Clark to run, she has to be she has to manipulate the voters in the voting across the political lines, because if they vote by the party lines, she's put a fork in it, she's done. So whenever they can come and pick off at the edges, then they would do that. And Trump has been able to achieve a lot of things, even though his party is piecemeal in back of him. They're really not gung ho about this man whom they consider to be an outsider too, but he's in their party. So how much of an outsider are they going to claim when the man is outside of the Democratic Party, but inside the Republican Party, and that's where they are, and they're going to disavow him in front of the Republicans who are supporting this man? That's not going to happen. But the cover up is very obvious here. They don't really. He's like a tick on their back because he is showing something can be done that they can't do, and by the contrast, he's also pointing out the mediocrity of these politicians because they're not that bright and they're not that smart and they're certainly not that sharp. People are fine, and I think they're inside that office right now in Washington because they're very afraid of people finding out how much askance are they of any kind of intellectual wherewithal and prowess to do that which they've been entrusted to do, which is to run this country with efficiency, which they don't do and have not done, except possibly to some extent in the election of Andrew Jackson. It had not been done fiscally before that, not even with Alexander Hamilton as the Secretary of the Treasury, and it certainly hasn't been done after Andrew Jackson's term, with Andrew Jackson being the only president to actually balance the budget during his administration. That's a certain skill there too. But I don't. We're not talking about. We're talking about an unusual person. That's just the bottom line of what Donald Trump represents. He's never going to be popular with them on either side of the political aisle. But as much as I like what Donald Trump is doing as the president, not everything, but I can I can I'm looking at the big picture here, and we need somebody to stand in the gap at this point because we are losing control of the country. Therefore, anybody can rein that in and stop the outsiders foaming at the mouth, seeing an opportunity to bring in something that contravenes what the framers put in place, which is what they try to do right now. Anybody can stop that and put skids on it. I have to go with that, and I give them credit for being a person standing in the gap. But does not mean that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool supporter of everything that goes on there, everything that happens in the administration. That's why it pained me this morning, but I did it. I came out in my post day on Facebook, and I came out against and demanded with my little 5 cent worth of clout, not even 5 cent worth, but whatever is minuscule, whatever the pennies are that's involved in it. I came out painfully to demand that Pam Bondi step down. And if and she went in with the idea of being a person that was involved in reforming government. I think she was committed to that. But when the Shan hits the fan and it's time to strike or strike out, what do you do when the issue now comes for you? Not when you're out there talking about it, but now the issue's on your desk. How do you behave in that situation? And I will tell you about an experience I had even in this regard here. I remember one time my step grandson at the school I was principal over had acted up in one of the classrooms, and one of the security guards brought him to the office, but didn't tell me they brought him down there to the office. And they said we got a guy that was cutting up in class, and we brought him down here to the office. I said, "Well, bring him in here because he's going home." Then he said this, and I knew they were kind of holding that back when he said this. I knew they were holding that back to see how I was going to respond. They said, "Well, we didn't tell you It's your grandson. My response was, "Well, you bring him in here right now because he's definitely going home." I, I think he must thought he had roller skates on when he left out of there. I threw him out faster than I did the others. That's the litmus test. How are you going to respond when the issue comes to you? It is in your wheelhouse, and your interests are your interests, your values, your prejudices, your friendships, your personal alliances are now on the table and have taken the forefront of the issue. How are you going to respond in that case right there? And that's a character test, and not everybody passes it. Very few of them pass it.
That's the reason why I'm angry. I don't like. I mean, I'm angry at a lot of what Trump's done because I put myself out there 3 times. I've lost friends over that. Okay,
Hmm.
I mean, how good of friends they are. But I do think there are times, if you really have a issue with somebody politically, it's probably say you should walk away from each other. I mean, it comes down to values, and
You
if
have
you
to
don't have the
make
same values, it's probably not good. It's not a good relationship.
John. You're making a point. You have to be. You must be willing to walk away because that's when you find out your friends. No friend would ask me to make a decision to go against the grain of my. It's not courage. The grain of my belief. I was saying to somebody in Africa when I was over there that I cannot do that because that if I lose that, I lose my dignity. And if I lose my dignity, I've lost everything. They want you to do some things like, put this in your suitcase and you can carry this across the water and blah, blah, blah. I'm not doing that. There was no grief. Doing stuff that's above board, and they get on my case because of that, and I'm gonna carry that stuff and put that in my bag. It don't belong in my bag, and I'm gonna carry it over there for you. I'm not doing that. And so they're character tests, and you have to be able to live up to the true meaning of your beliefs. That's hard to do. Keep doing that though. It grounds you and makes you stronger. You don't get stronger by giving and bending and blowing with the wind and being a willow tree and the wind blowing away, the wind is blowing the tree right back there, and next day it's from the side and you're blowing you that way. You can't do that. You have to stand on something resolutely, and that's where you stand. And when you don't do that, you don't have my support. I think Pam Bondi did a great job as the Attorney General of Florida. That's why Trump selected her number two. He wasn't. She was not the first choice, but when they wouldn't confirm uh, Gates, she was a very good number two choice. And how were they going to go against? They put a woman there. Is Mamie Clark going to oppose her? Or what about Lisa Murkowski? Is she going to oppose her? You see, that would have brought them out more than they want to come out. They want to act like this is about something other than what it's about. It's about politics, but they want to make it like it's some kind of it's on such higher moral ground. We're not voting party line. We're gonna vote by our sentiment. The man not qualified, and we can't go along. He did this when he was in the House Representative. Okay, fine. He puts Pam Bondi in there as a calling card on their shenanigans and their hypocrisy. That's what it was. Their hypocrisy. These are two hypocrites. And it was actually calling Mamie Clark and Lisa Murkowski out by putting the woman in there. And let's see what they do with that. And if they continue to vote against them, then this is about Donald Trump, isn't it? It ain't about your standing on some principle. You just don't like the man. You're not going to vote for him because he's broken your house. So he called him on it. Well, Pam Bondi got the position. He came in there with the idea, and his whole team came up with the idea. They're going to right these wrongs. But Pam Bondi is the second most powerful person in the federal government. Now, you say, well, the Secretary of State, because you're talking about the line of succession in the country. That line of succession does not have to do with the power. It has with when the office was in fact created. The vice president is the voice, is the mini me voice of the president. He is the president's parrot, and if he starts being the parrot of the president, then he needs to step down, because that's his role. You notice the Constitution only assigns the role for the president, for the vice president, away from the vice presidential office. Have you noticed that? Let me ask you this question: you scholars, Constitution scholars, what is the role in the Constitution for the vice president? Time's up. The vice president is the president of the Senate. And he becomes president when the president in office is no longer there. That's not the vice presidency at that point. He's a person in the presidential office. There is no role. There is no vice presidential role. They don't even waste the time with that in the Constitution of the United States. You will not see a line in the Constitution of the United States where it says the vice president will blah blah and all of that. He will break here's how important his role is. He'll break the tie if the Senate cannot agree upon a particular bill that come across its institutional desk, and it's 50-50, and you have an impasse. The vice president can then come into it as the outsider, sitting in as the president of the Senate, but not a member of the Senate, but can break the impasse by having a vote. Cannot vote if the vote is not 50-50 or somewhere is tied down the line below 50-50, and doesn't need to have his voice. He's just sitting there mute over the deliberations he's the president of the Senate, but he does not have a vote in the Senate. That's how powerful his position is. But I'm telling you that it is painful for a person that's in the office that Pam Bondi is in. It's painful to the country when that person is there in that most powerful office, beside the power of the presidency or president of the United States, and really above the presidency of the Secretary of State. I know the line of succession very well, but I'm telling you that the Attorney General is in a more powerful office than the Secretary of State, who, if he goes abroad, or she goes abroad, as it was in the case of Hillary Clinton, go there as a mouthpiece of the president. But the Attorney General, if they speak in the voice of the president, then they are not independent enough to do the things that they do as the Attorney General, because to carry out the vestiges of the law sometimes require you to do things that may not be popular with the President of the United States, but it may be lawful and it may be constitutional. But you don't want to. I want to say this also. You don't want an Attorney General that will be objecting like Bill Barr was, that's in there fighting the president, which is what he was doing. You don't want that in there. But there are some things that are independent, because your voice is that of the Constitution inside of the landscape of the executive branch of government. That's another part of the check and balances inside of the government that's inside of the checks and balances in the Constitution of the United States. Is that true? And do you scholars agree with that? No, this is very unusual. Trump, you're very unusual. Unbelievably different than anyone that's ever held that office before. And I would put you way up there, deservedly way up there in terms of some of the people that have occupied that office. Very few of them have been great. Most of them have been at best mediocre. But you don't need to have great presidents after George Washington. You need to have lawful presidents who are willing to walk into the mold and maintain the mold that was created by George Washington and stand in that mold and do that which is being required of you by the vestiges of Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States, to stay in your lane and execute, make sure the laws are being executed. That's a strict corridor of power, and do not surrender that corridor of power to any of the other two branches of government. That's also wrong. Should not be done either. And it pains me, probably more than most, to see these Johnny come laters, these punch drunk office holders whose mediocrity is felt, and that's why they act the way they act in office. They have never done the thing they had in the power, and they get drunk with it, and they're up there thinking that they can, in fact, order a president of the United States around, and the president allows that to go on. That is unforgivable to me. Unforgivable. To surrender the perch that is bestowed upon you and listen to these hot heads like James Boasberg, a district judge, and have this judge ordering the president to act in a certain way. And this man even had the nerve to order the president of the United States. It was too late for him to carry out this order, the president to act on it. But if he acted on it, I would have been, man, I would have been so. I think at that point I would have had to call for Donald Trump's removal, because you might as well not have a president. You can take that kind of order. The plane is in the air, flying the criminals out of the country, and you order to bring them back, and you do so. Look, I got to tell you something. The Constitution doesn't allow you to do that. You're not allowed to be a traitor to. You're not allowed to be a traitor. You can't be ordered to be a traitor. That's treason. And they're going to order you to bring the criminals that you put out of the country back into the country. Give me a Where are we? Where are we going with this? Can you imagine where we're going? Where are we going with this, folks? The man was told to bring the criminals back. And they're trying to argue whether or not the president should bring these criminals back into the country after he's already got them on that plane out of the country. And if he had not been, if those judges, that judge had not been confronted by the president of El Salvador, who's looking at those dollars that they're getting from the United States, that could have been a problem. But he was telling them also down there that these are this is our responsibility, blah blah blah. So how are they going to? He's not subject to that guy's nonsense, James Boasberg's nonsense. So it didn't have any. It wasn't resolute in El Salvador, but it never should have been resolute here either. But Pam Bondi, I'll tell you something. I think you have some great qualities. You have a great and you have a great record, and you've come a long way. But did a good job when you were the Attorney General of Florida. But you come a long way from there to here. And given the baggage that was there before you, and let me tell you what the baggage was real quickly. Merrick Garland sat in that chair before you. And that put a lot of weight on you when you walk in that office because Mary Garland right now should be in prison for what he did to the people on January 6th and his violating of the civil rights of people who he put in jail on trumped up charges. The J6 committee endorsed that travesty. This was a constitutional travesty for the Attorney General of the United States to step on the constitutional rights of citizens who were there under Article 1, the right to petition the government. They were there for that reason. They were there under the auspices of the Constitution of the United States to stand up on their constitutional rights, the right to petition government for the redress of their grievances. Because the alternative to that, if you cannot redress your grievances by going to the government for that redress of your grievances, the only other thing that can be done then is to pick up the gun, the ballot or the bullet. And you don't want that choice to have to be made. So the framers, in their wisdom, in Amendment 1, in what is called the First Amendment, in what they call the Bill of Rights, when the Constitution is really the Bill of Rights itself. But the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, as they call it, is the right to speak, the right to assemble peacefully, and the right to petition your government for redressing your grievances, for your voice to be heard, or what are you feeling from the government carrying out its responsibilities? What's your attitude about it? We have to listen to that. We need to listen to that because that's how we make our decisions going forward. And for them to be arrested for going to Washington and standing there against what we now know and what I knew then was a stolen election, and to be locked up for going there exercising a constitutional right, and to be put in jail and incarcerated without trial in this country is beyond being forgiven for it. The man has to be put in jail. And Pam Bondi comes behind this man having those deficits to make up for it. And for her then to go in there and do what she did with the Jeff Epstein case, where we don't, since 2005, we've been trying to find out who are those predators on that island. And it's not hard to find because there you have the information available, the flight logs and all of that, that's all available. But then to be bottling it up and claim there's nothing, there's no there, that's on Pam Bundy's dime right now. She's the Attorney General of the United States. She's a chief law officer enforcer in the United States. And for her to take that position is beyond the pale given her predecessor's behavior. And for her to come behind it, knowing that that has to be cleaned up, and for her to be acting in this manner right now, yeah, I call for her to do this. She has to stand down. And that's what I said there in my article, and I did it without any reservation, unequivocally. Pam Bondi must resign her office. Okay, until next week. I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.